Calling to order the October 3rd, 2011 meeting of the Municipality of Anchorage Planning and Zoning Commission. We have a quorum. If the Secretary will please call the roll.
Nancy Pease. Here. Jim Frederick.
Here.
Connie Yoshimura. Arthur Isham.
Here.
Bruce Phelps. Stacy Dean.
Here.
Terry Parks.
Here.
Dana Cruz.
Here.
Richard Wilson.
Here. Thank you. We've had a request this evening to change the order of our business. Mr. Frederick, if you'd handle that, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to change the order of the day and move item F5A, case 2011-114, review and recommendations on the 2012 to 2017 six-year fiscal plan to the first order of business.
Is there a second? Thank you. It's been seconded by Ms. Dean. Any discussion? Any objection? Okay, fine. We've changed the order of business. Ms. Dean, would you please handle disclosures, please?
Mr. Pruse, do you have any disclosures?
Let's see. About the only thing I have is a hangar facility at the Anchorage International Airport.
Mr. Isham, do you have any disclosures?
I have none.
Mr. Parks, do you have any disclosures?
None.
Mr. Wilson, do you have any disclosures?
I worked at the Anchorage Airport for many years, up until 3 years ago.
Mr. Fredericks, do you have any disclosures?
No, I don't.
Ms. Pease, do you have any disclosures?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we don't have a consent agenda this evening. So the first item of business will be F5A, case 2011-114. And I asked Mr. Dan Moore, the city treasurer, to sort of give a very brief presentation on that. We had it in somewhat detailed at a work session, but for the benefit of the audience, I'd like to have a brief recap of what you presented. And by the way, this is a non-public hearing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Dan Moore, I'm the Municipal Treasurer, and tonight I'm filling in for Lucinda Mahoney, who's the Chief Fiscal Officer, and I will keep it brief since we did cover quite a bit during the work session. The six-year fiscal program is a report that's required each year. It's cited in the city charter and in the code, and this particular report is basically a view of the current administration in terms of what the goals of the city should be in their eyes with the input that they receive from the community. And then also, how does that translate into the current budget decisions and in the future budget decisions that are necessary in order to keep the city in a balanced budget and a prudent fiscal standing in the eyes of the bond credit rating agencies. The report itself has 4 different sections. It's a combination of input from the citizen community dialogues as well as information from the Office of Management and Budget. There's a lot of work put into the fiscal projection model by the Chief Fiscal Officer, and then the profile section on the state of the economy and the future projections for the city is provided by Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. Just to list about 6 or 8 themes that you will see running throughout this report, this is just part of an overview, is there's a lot of emphasis on speaking to the community, both in terms of accountability with how we spend the public dollars and also measuring the performance of the city program and services that are offered, and then reaching out to the community through various communication means. That's one particular theme that's in the budget. Another theme is fiscal investment and responsibility. That would include investing in infrastructure, maintaining our bond rating, also making sure that we keep within a prudent level of bond debt. So what you'll see in these projections is that we actually expect to pay off slightly more debt than we add over the 6-year period. And then lastly, on the budget itself, we want to have a balanced budget. We want to hold the line on property taxes. We want to continue investing in public safety, and we want to contain costs to the degree we can. The biggest drivers of cost at this time are labor costs, and as I mentioned in the work session, labor cost growth is anywhere from 3 to 5%. Revenue growth is only 1 to 2%. So in order to make up that difference, that fiscal gap, we need to find efficiencies in our government, and that is primarily going to occur through the investment in new system software that is covering our financial software. SAP is the preferred vendor for that. And then we're also going to replace another major system for our property management, the billing and assessing of property. And then we're going to invest in some other efficiencies with time cards and the use of maintenance facilities and operations to try to be more cost conscious on how money is spent efficiently. So that is an overview. This report does give a snapshot of where we are currently, but it also really focuses a lot on the future for the city, and it tries to set the direction and be consistent with that. And it's definitely a reflection of the current administration. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Moore? Ms. Pease.
Yes, I have a couple quick questions, and I apologize that I wasn't able to make the work session. Two are kind of minor. On page 2, I was just curious. It says that the vision of Anchorage as a premier destination includes major events hosted, visitor-friendly, and a signature feature. And I was just curious what the signature feature was.
That's a great question, and unfortunately I can't answer that. I didn't write those words. I will find out, and if it's missing a word, we will make sure to correct that.
Okay, thanks. Another sort of minor question. On page 4, the promotion of economic development calls for investigating opportunity for Winter Olympics, and I wondered whether that was a citizen-based interest or the mayor's interest, or I just wondered whether there was any citizen survey to see what the interest is.
I personally don't know the answer. I apologize. 2 in a row now. I don't know the answer to. I can follow up and find out for you.
And one more thing.
Go ahead.
On page 12, it talks about challenges ahead. It talks about oil and gas and federal funding, belt tightening. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking if this were challenges and changes ahead, it might be good to look at what economic changes the Knik Arm crossing might produce, both in terms of employment and business investment, and particularly with regard to the port and the airport.
Yeah, I can pass that on. I don't have direct knowledge of the sort of the long-term impact of that project. But I will pass that on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Frederick.
Thanks. Through the chair, 2 things. One, you mentioned that the 6-year fiscal program was developed in part through community dialogue. Can you describe that process and
Sure. I believe it was over a year ago. The city contracted with a firm from California, and they were a professional firm that specializes in reaching out to the community and bringing in literally hundreds and hundreds of diverse interests to talk to them about the issues of the city. And I sat through one of these sessions myself just to get a good feel for it, and over a series of events with different mixes, and this is all done. They pick people in a somewhat random way to really get the most diversity of opinion. They took all that input, asked a lot of very tough questions, a lot of counterbalancing questions, and then from all that they summarized their findings in a formal report that was still on the city website now, and that was used to guide the city and to sort of affirm some of the goals that are in the this report. One of the biggest messages I heard in the session I was at was talking about efficiency. The citizens want to make sure that local government is operating as efficiently as possible. So these investments in new software and just trying to keep the costs down, keep the budget flat, keep the property taxes low, those are all consistent with that theme.
Thanks. I have one more.
Go ahead.
If I may. Could you elaborate a little bit on the kind of savings that are anticipated to result from what I assume is probably a fairly substantial investment in new software for your financial systems and time tracking and assessment and all that stuff?
Yep. The city has a financial system that's about 11 years old, and it was installed but not fully exploited to get all the gains you can from a system like that. In the last 11 years, technology continues to change radically, and the newer systems are very, very efficient, and they're able to make processes much less paper-oriented and much less manual intervention required. And so just in terms of like the city's financial statement that it produces each year, right now there's a lot of supplemental spreadsheets that go to support those financial statements that are all done manually, and if one thing changes in one spreadsheet, it takes hours to flow through everything. With the new system, they'll be able to produce financial statements all tied together with all that, without manual intervention, without hours of time fixing errors and things like that. So the amount of human resource that will be needed to produce financial information across the city will be less, and through attrition there will not be the need for as many bodies. Same thing is true for our payroll system, and when they go to electronic time cards, departments such as police or fire, they have I don't know, it's 5, 10, 15 people dedicated to doing nothing but payroll. If they can automate and use business rules to try to get the processing of payroll done by the computer, you don't need all those people to produce the work. So the savings is going to be both in terms of less headcount and also just being able to efficiently produce the information, and also to have information that is actually usable and the employees can spend time using better quality information to get better results.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll let the record show that Mr. Phelps is here. Mr. Phelps, do you have anything to disclose this evening? Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Moore? I call your attention to that change on page 5, 6H for judiciously instead of judicially.
And also, Mr. Chair, there was a person in your audience earlier that pointed out on the very back page where the fiscal model is, it says the dollars are in millions, they're actually in thousands, so I wish they were in millions, but I will fix that also.
Okay, very good.
And for the follow-up questions, do I send them to the answers to those questions? Do you want them directed to you and you share with the commission, or do I give it to staff?
Give it to staff, and they'll get it to us.
Okay.
And basically, I would anticipate that we'll go ahead and indicate that we did review the document and that the comments on the public record can go to you, and so that can be passed on. So I would ask for a positive motion to indicate that.
So moved.
Ms. Pease, okay, is there a second? Mr. Frederick? Ms. Pease, you want to just state your motion, please?
In matter of case 2011-114, the 6-year fiscal program, we move for approval with the change mentioned on page 5.
In addition to the comments in the public record, too, I would assume.
Yes, in addition to the comments in the public record and the questions we've asked, which Mr. Moore will take forward.
Very good. Is there any further discussion? Any objection? Okay, that passes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Okay, now we're going to move on to our unfinished business, and this is case number 2011-090, and this is the West Anchorage District Plan. This was continued from the 26th, and basically we took a significant amount of public testimony at that time. We continued the public hearing because the airport was not available at that time, so individuals from Ted Stevens Anchorage International will have 5 minutes this evening initially, and then anybody else that wishes to testify and that did not testify on the 26th is welcome to testify at this time. And again, the rules are 3 minutes as an individual, 5 minutes if you represent something such as a community council and things of that nature. We're not going to have any staff update. I think we got that in quite detailed format at the initial public hearing. Is there anything, though, Mr. Tobish, you wish to add that's changed since the last time around?
Mr. Chair, I just want to call to your attention 2 new items that you would have gotten tonight. A staff response to questions from Commissioner Phelps from last week, and brief staff response to questions and comments submitted by Commissioner Pease this morning. And there's one additional comment that came in through email. And if we get to Commissioner Pease's comments, I have one minor change to add at that time.
Okay, very good. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and take testimony from Ted Stevens, Anchorage International. And, sir, you have 5 minutes. Please state your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is John Parrott, and I'm the manager of the Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the West Anchorage District Plan. I thank and commend the Municipal Planning Department for this effort. This has been an excellent opportunity for both the airport and the surrounding communities to engage in a dialogue to identify the areas of concern that each cause the other. I believe this has been an educational experience for some of those involved to learn about many of the constraints that the airport operates under, such as the FAA grant assurances. The airport has a responsibility to develop its property responsibly to meet the needs of the global aviation industry. That responsible development is not only required by the FAA grant assurances, but is also how the airport serves as an economic engine, not only for Anchorage and Alaska, but on a global scale. What is responsible development? Defining future development is both simple and complex. What specific infrastructure will the airport need to build in the next 5 years? Will we need more aircraft parking spaces, cargo processing facilities, de-icing pads or treatment facilities? These are all possibilities that must be decided and dealt with as the needs of the aviation industry become more defined. What is relatively certain is that at some point in the future, the airport will need to develop all the property that it controls to provide the needed infrastructure. The airport does not have the option and could not responsibly exercise the option, if it existed, of simply not developing its property. That would violate the grant assurances and do a great disservice to the people of Alaska by stifling economic opportunity. How can the eventual development of the airport best be accomplished responsibly to minimize any negative impact to the immediately surrounding communities while continuing to serve as a strong economic engine for the city and state? In an ideal world, the airport and the nearby communities would be separated by a significant distance. That is not the case in Anchorage, so we need to look for other solutions. A land trade between the airport and the municipality is one option to provide a buffer to the communities. During the airport's Coolest Land Use Plan public process, as well as during the West Anchorage District Plan effort, the community desire for a buffer area has been a consistent theme. Much has been said recently about the airport desiring a land trade to facilitate the construction of an additional runway, which would destroy the integrity of the coastal trail. The airport does believe that a land trade could minimize many of the current areas of conflict and provide for a buffer between the airport and the residential areas. The land trade suggested in the West Anchorage District Plan would move future airport development to the west, away from the residential areas. That development could include a runway, as shown on the current airport master plan. and/or additional aircraft parking places or cargo processing facilities. These developments will occur somewhere at some time in the future. The question of when is unknown, but the West Anchorage District Plan does suggest that responsible decisions now can help determine the best where for the future development. The land trade would not destroy the coastal trail, although future development might require realignment of the trail, as will the future Anchorage wastewater utility treatment plant expansion. In some of the areas that might need to be realigned, the trail does not currently follow the coast, such as around the Anchorage wastewater utility site. Realignment of the coastal trail could include significant enhancements of the trail, similar to the enhancements the airport is facilitating to the ski trails as part of its current construction effort on Runway 7 Right. The coastal trail exists on airport property because the airport believes it is important. The airport has publicly committed to maintaining a contiguous coastal trail. The public process that has resulted in the current proposed plan has been extensive and inclusive. Any future development by the airport would involve a public process, which will also be extensive and inclusive. No small vocal group should be allowed to undermine a good public process. The West Anchorage District Plan will not determine if the airport continues to develop. The West Anchorage District Plan will not determine if a land trade takes place. Approval of the current West Anchorage District Plan simply suggests options for future responsible development and sets the stage for discussions between the airport, the municipality, and the communities. The airport looks forward to these discussions. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sir, could you state your name for the record again? We lost it there at the beginning.
John Parrott.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Okay, other questions for... Okay, Ms. Please.
One question I have is, you say that the coastal trail can be realigned. If the airport is not allowed to, under FAA rules, is my understanding, not allowed to permanently acquiesce to any non-aviation use of its property, how could the airport ensure that there would be a permanent coastal trail, whether it tunnels under the runway or whether it goes around the runway on fill that the airport places into Cook Inlet, if you, as an airport, can't protect any non-aviation or ensure or swear to any non-aviation uses?
Right. It is an interesting question. The grant assurances would prevent us from permanently giving away property. However, if you look at reasonable methods of construction, whether you're talking parking areas, aircraft parking areas, runways, taxiways, most types of infrastructure would not have infrastructure and a fence right at the edge of the bluff. There would be some reasonable amount of space between the development and the physical coast. Even if you built a runway into the inlet, there would be a slope off that runway, which would provide space to put a trail. So we believe there are many reasonable ways of developing the area and maintaining a contiguous trail.
If I may follow up,
Go ahead.
it would still be a trail on airport property if the airport fills and creates a runway, or if the trail were to go under a tunnel of 100 yards or long or whatever, that would be airport property too.
In those cases, it would be, yes. There would always be the potential that at some point in time in the future, additional land trades, if all the reasonable areas, all the places that could be developed had been developed, if there was a border area that was physically not able to be developed, there could potentially be future additional land trades. Very little, although many people would like to say, this has been done, it's now permanent, it's forever. Forever is a very long time. So there could be other changes in ownership. But as I said, the current trail exists on airport property. It exists because the airport thinks it's important and has for several years through a number of different administrators.
Further questions?
Yes, one other question. So if this land trade were to occur, the trail would still be continuing to cross airport property while the land remains undeveloped. So how does that ensure any, continued use? If, for example, the land trade were to proceed as proposed in the West Anchorage District Plan, Point Woronzof Park, if I have the name right, goes to the airport. Now the trail's still crossing a piece of airport property, and there's no money or, construction program underway to realign it somewhere else. So how is that? Isn't that still subject to 90-day closure on a 90-day notice?
One of the things that needs to be considered is any significant development on the airport would be subject to a public process. The airport will soon be initiating a master plan, which will have significant public involvement. If the airport decided that it eventually was time to build an additional runway, there would be an environmental impact statement required and a public process. All of these are opportunities for the public to express its desire and for the airport to express its desire that the trail remain. So the trail, if there was a land trade, the trail would not be at any more risk than it is today. And I don't think most people are currently thinking, oh my goodness, the trail could be taken away at any point in time, because that's simply not, it's not a realistic outcome.
You stated that the trail wouldn't be at any more risk than it is today, so the way I picture it, it's at the same amount of risk as it is today. It's just crossing a different piece of airport property subject to closure on a 90-day notice.
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Pruse?
Thank you. Could you inform the Commission what the current status is of Coulis and the airport's plans, if there are any?
Certainly. The airport hopes to conclude the legal lease termination within the next few days, taking possession of the property back from the Department of Defense and the National Guard Bureau. We have a number of lease applications for various pieces of property. They range from third-party developers to film production companies to state agencies and a telecommunications company. They have desires anywhere from a single building to perhaps 5 or 6 buildings, a hangar, some ramp, and potentially building new buildings. So we have a fair amount of interest, and we anticipate, hopefully, public noticing those lease applications in the very near future and potentially having occupants in January.
Go ahead.
Is it your intent to continue it to be aviation-related only?
The topography of Coulis lends itself to a mixed use. The hangars and the ramp area are clearly aeronautical use. On a short-term basis, we have discussed with the FAA using the uplands or the southern portion of Coulis for non-aeronautical purposes. The FAA is very reluctant to approve anything other than short-term use of that as a non-aeronautical area unless it's ancillary to an associated aeronautical use.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Phelps?
I have a couple of questions. The first question concerns a land exchange. I work for the state and am involved in land management. Land exchanges are very difficult to do. Have you given consideration to other approaches than a land exchange to effectuate some of these changes that you're describing in the plan?
We have the options we have tentatively explored are also complex. I know a number of folks have suggested a fee simple acquisition of airport property by the municipality. That would run into significant problems at first blush with the FAA grant assurances. The airport is not cash poor. The airport's most significant limitation for its future development is land, area that can be developed. So divesting ourselves of that resource to get some short-term monetary gain would be a difficult option to sell to the FAA. The airport, on the other hand, does not have an excessive amount of cash to simply go out and attempt to purchase the property that we desire. Also, the problem would be that it's not considered for sale. So what we have tried to do during the West Anchorage District planning effort is look at 3 different sets of needs. There's property that the airport believes would allow it to develop away from the residential areas. There's property that the communities have told us they value very highly for recreational use, such as Little Campbell Lake and the Connors Bog Dog Park. There's also property that the municipality is interested in, such as the snow dump to the east of Connors Bog. We believe that there's a potential win-win-win by each entity getting a significant amount of property that it desires.
What are the requirements, either state requirements or federal requirements on a land exchange? Is it acre by acre, or is it value for value, and who approves?
It's comparable value.
Comparable value.
I don't know that we'd have to get down to the square foot and the dollar or the nickel, but it needs to be similar value.
Yeah. So you are going to be driven by value to some degree in this process if you do a land exchange?
Yes.
I would imagine you would have to.
Yes.
So explain to me the assurance process that you'd have to go through with the FAA. The land exchange between two parties is possible, but I would imagine that before you actually engaged in really significant discussions with the municipality, you would first check it out with FAA.
We have had preliminary discussions with the FAA. The FAA wants to make sure that we maximize the development potential for aviation infrastructure of the airport, and that we do not appear to be giving away a resource and getting something of far less value in exchange. So looking at areas around the edge of the airport, which could potentially provide a buffer between the airport and the community, in total, it may come up to a significant amount of acreage, and there are some areas on the other side of the road, so to speak, east of Jewel Lake, south of Raspberry, Little Campbell Lake, that would be difficult to develop for aeronautical purposes, whereas property to the west of the airport would more reasonably fit into that category. So we have discussed it tentatively with them, and it seems to be a reasonable approach in their mind.
So ultimately, what they're concerned with is the reasonable development of the airport and the assurance that the land exchange meets that criteria.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned about a master plan. Can you tell me when you think you might do that?
We will probably initiate that in the next calendar year.
How long do you think it's going to take? Approximately.
Traditionally, a master plan takes about 2 years. There are some in the federal government that think they should take much longer, and we at the airport are personally pushing to see if one couldn't be accomplished in less than a year. The reason for that is we already have underway an Alaska International Airport System master plan, which is going to produce the forecast and the forecast methodology, which is a significant amount of the work done in an airport's master plan. Assuming no great changes to the economy, that piece of our airport's master plan will already be accomplished. We believe it's in the airport and the community's best interest to do a master plan in a short period of time, because the longer it takes, the less valid the initial assumptions are when you get to the final conclusion.
I would agree with you that it's desirable to do it in the shortest time possible. I guess what I'm concerned about now is the interface between the West Anchorage plan and the master plan. I can see the master plan coming up with very specific proposals for pieces of land, and that those recommendations are based upon pretty hard analysis and pretty careful engineering and related evaluations. And the West Anchorage plan provides like a general schema for what might be happening, but I guess my expectation would be is that it would be somewhat premature to enter into discussions with the municipality on specific parcels of land until you had completed that master plan. Can you give me a comment on that?
I can. I think as we have gone through both the coolest land use planning effort, previous master plans at the airport, and the West Anchorage District Plan, a theme that has continuously resonated through all of those is the areas of conflict are along the border that separates the airport from the residential areas of the municipality. And that hasn't changed for many years. So in our mind, from a strategic outlook, at some point in time, if the airport property is developed, it will be developed right next to a residential neighborhood. We believe that responsible steps can be taken now to provide that separation and move airport development to the west, away from the residential neighborhoods that have had the conflict.
Well, I think there's a lot to be gained by an approach like that. One of the concerns I think I was hearing the public speak to was, if you were to develop to the west and utilize some of those municipal properties, would you completely utilize all those properties, or would you basically utilize that which is necessary for the development? What I'm getting to is that there are probably areas that on this track here that we're looking at on the map that probably would not be developed because they're so close to the coast and have a lot of sensitive features to them. I would imagine that only portions of these parcels will be developed. What's your thoughts on that?
Once again, if you look to the western part of the airport does have property to the west of the current complex, north of the east-west runways and west of the fuel farm. That goes all the way to the coast and out into the mudflats. During any development process, once again, there will be a public process, an environmental impact statement for a significant development, and there are certain things that will undoubtedly limit the ability of the airport to develop right up to the edge of the boundary. We believe, and the FAA believes, that that's reasonable. So we would anticipate that there would always be some band of property along or near the coast where the recreational uses would still be allowed along the perimeter.
So you feel then, from what I'm gathering from your answers, that it's reasonable to adopt this plan now, even with the master plan coming up, because the general thrust of what is trying to be accomplished is already more or less identified in terms of development to the west and buffer areas adjacent to residential areas. Am I getting that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Just for reminder, we do have two people that are on the airport master plan committee that would, participate in that, and it's Mr. Wilson and Mr. Pruse.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of Mr. Wilson, you're next in line. Go ahead.
One of the issues that's come up was, do we need to have an airport in the middle of our city? What has been done in the past, or as recent as you can recall, to analyze the possibility of just relocating the airport or relocating functions of the airport to another location? And what would that imply? What would it cost, and what would be some of the environmental impacts?
It would cost a lot and have severe environmental impacts. In both the 2002 master plan and the 2008 master planning study, relocation of the airport or some functions of the airport were looked at. There was an alternative to have either the airport or an additional airport on Fire Island, and there was a serious look taken in each of those efforts at relocating the airport to what used to be the Knik Aviation Preserve out north of Point McKenzie in the vicinity of the prison. In round numbers, relocating the airport to the Knik Aviation Preserve at this point in time would probably be $10 billion plus, and that would be just moving the airport, not moving the people, the infrastructure, the companies, and everything else that would have to relocate. And the transportation challenges, there are a few thousand people that come to work at the airport every day from the valley, and I used to be one of those for about 9 years. There are 7,000 to 8,000 people with badges that work at the airport that would either have to move or reverse commute out to the valley. So the disruption to that flow would be significant. One of the other ideas that you mentioned was relocating some functions. Many times we hear the suggestion that we should, just move the cargo out to the other airport and keep the passengers at the Anchorage airport. Unfortunately, one of the little-known secrets about the aviation industry is that most of the passenger airplanes don't make any money off the people. They make their profit off the boxes that are in the belly of the airplane. Alaska Airlines, all the other airlines fly cargo in the belly. Some of that is flown for FedEx and UPS out to the rural communities. So the interrelations between cargo traffic and passenger traffic does not allow for a simple parsing of the two into two separate airports. Even if you could do that, replicating the infrastructure of the airport, the fuel tanks, the fuel hydrant system, the runways and taxiways, to duplicate that in another location just to split the two types of traffic would be an incredible inefficiency and leave a lot of wasted capability at one or both of the airports. So those options have been looked at, both in the 2002 and the 2008 master planning efforts, and I believe, to the best of my knowledge, in both cases, the end result was find a way to maximize the capability of basically the existing footprint of the airport.
Has the airport done anything to, what has the airport done to reduce its environmental footprint in general? You've got a lot of opportunities. You've got the noise. You've got the location of the operating aircraft and how you handle fluids and so forth.
We have a couple things that we do on a daily basis. We do have a preferential runway program, whereas winds permitting, we will normally take off to the north on runway 32 over the water and land on runway 7 right, coming in over the water. So by keeping the takeoffs and the landings over the water, we do minimize the amount of noise over the population of the city of Anchorage. We have made significant progress in the stormwater drainage. Those of you that are familiar with it will remember the times when Lake Hood had no vegetation in it. That was many years ago, and the current problem with Lake Hood as a seaplane base is that there are a lot of weeds that get caught up in the water rudders of the aircraft. That's bad news for the pilots, but it's good news for the health of the lake because it means that it now has enough oxygen in it to support plant life. So Lakes Hood and Spenard have actually shown significant recovery from their previous state, and that is by both reducing the amount of aircraft de-icing fluid and controlling where that de-icing fluid goes.
Thank you.
Mr. Frederick.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Wilson covered my question, which had to do with relocations.
Okay, any other questions from Mr. Parrott? Ms. Pease.
Yes, I had two follow-up questions on the items just discussed. What about the potential or likelihood that general aviation might begin to relocate over to the Mat-Su Valley? And I say that because of airspace. I assume at some point you're going to come up against airspace limitations, and would that be a likely component that might relocate with less infrastructure investment, and what would that do for the land availability, reuse availability?
Much of the land currently used by general aviation, as it currently exists on the east side of Postmark Drive, would require major road rerouting and building infrastructure to get any large aircraft over to quote-unquote the big airport. The Anchorage airspace, for those that have flown in other parts of the country, is generally acknowledged as one of the most complicated pieces of airspace on the planet, with Elmendorf, Merrill Field, Lake Hood, Anchorage International, not to mention Campbell Lake, and a number of other airstrips, all the, up to Birchwood, and yet the airspace has been divided up so that procedurally the different aircraft going to different locations are separated. Because of the north-south or the north takeoffs and the easterly landings at Anchorage, the Anchorage International traffic is generally consistently separated from the general aviation traffic. And I quite frankly, having flown there, could see both of those increasing in numbers and not adding to the conflict. As we get to new technology such as NextGen, with satellite-based navigation, as well as the ability in the aircraft to see where the other aircraft are, I think that would allow us to go a long, long way down the road before we'd have any significant conflicts.
Okay. And then with regard to the drainage off of the runway surfaces, Did I understand there's a new drainage system being instituted, and will that require settling ponds, or where will that drain into Cook Inlet now?
Are you referring to the EPA effluent limit guidelines that are proposed, or to an East Air Park storm drain project that we have?
You better mention both, because I vaguely
Okay.
remember some changes there and wondered where the pollutants are now headed.
We do have some plans in East Air Park to continue to improve the collection of the primarily aircraft de-icing fluids that are used there. We have procedurally, we no longer allow what would be called traditional de-icing methods to be used on wide-bodied aircraft in East Air Park. That's the area that currently drains into Lakes Hood and Spenard. We took that action because those were and are still considered impaired water bodies, although they are recovering. So we've taken some procedural actions to minimize the damage to the aircraft de-icing fluid. There is a proposal by the Environmental Protection Agency to require aircraft or airports where more than 460,000 gallons of de-icing fluid is used each year to collect and treat 60% of that de-icing fluid. That is not yet a final rule, so we're not yet certain how that will come into play. We have been in consultation with the airlines at the airport. They have engaged a consultant to start work already on what would be the best way for the airport to comply with the EPA guidelines, and we will be meeting with them later this month to discuss options. This is an area where, unlike many airports, we are cooperating with the airlines since it's their operation that causes the ethylene and propylene glycol to be used. We don't want to impose something that makes their operation any more difficult than it has to be. So we're going to work with them to minimize the impact of their operation, but ensure that the airport is in compliance with whatever the new EPA guidelines are.
And would that likely require use of any of the Is it far enough along to know what lands might be involved?
It's certainly possible that it might involve a settling pond or a treatment facility. It could involve recycling of the de-icing fluid. It could also involve using newer technology to spray much less de-icing fluid. So a number of options are on the table.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Pruse.
Thank you. Could you give me an update on the any TSA issues for security and public access around Lake Hood, or what you envision? Will there be any public restrictions in the future? Are there any?
Anything I say would have to be a guess. We have not had any indication from the current federal security director that there's going to be any push to cause Lake Hood to be a secure facility. We do still anticipate at some point in time in the near future the large aircraft security program that the TSA brought out once before and recalled to come out again with significant changes. But we have not seen any indication that there's a big movement to classify small general aviation aircraft as a specific threat. One of the things we believe that's in our favor is while there are close to 1,000 small aircraft at Lake Hood, both on wheels and floats, there are also several small aircraft at Birchwood. There are aircraft at Merrill Field. There are aircraft at a number of private strips. And so if you enclosed Lake Hood and made it secure, that would not prevent a small, unscreened, unsecure aircraft from flying into Anchorage International. So in our mind, we believe there's a good argument to make that there's really no need to do much more than what is being done, which is an active airport watch program in coordination with the Alaska Airmen and AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and the airport police, and regular patrols by airport personnel.
Mr. Wilson.
I wanted to return to the potential future expansion if the demand for aviation operating surfaces grows in the future. But first, before I do that, what is the reason for embarking on a master plan in the coming year? What's driving that effort?
Normally, it's considered good business practice to do a master plan about every 5 years. We were a little late on the last one, and then before it was completed, the economy took a nosedive, and it didn't seem prudent to complete a master plan when the economy and the aviation industry was already so radically different than when we started the plan with the forecast. So we've attempted to wait, and quite frankly, I was hoping we could wait until there was a stable, positive economy in the aviation industry, and that hasn't yet happened. But it appears to be more stable than it was. So that's sort of the reason for the timing. We're late, but we were trying to find a time when the industry was a little less volatile.
So let's talk about if there were a need to relocate the coastal trail, which is a real important issue to the folks in this room and throughout the community. And you've indicated that you have a goal of preserving the contiguous trail. And if you were to add another runway, which would spill into the required property from the Cook Inlet, because of I assume because of separation of the runways for safety, in relocating the coastal trail around that new structure and put it on the slope as you described or somewhere off away from the runway. What do you how do you see that being developed? Would that take a tunnel? Do you think it's likely that you would run it underneath a what is it, 300, 400 foot wide set of pavement, or would you think that's likely?
I honestly don't know. I think that would be decided in the public process of looking at, first of all, is it time to build a new runway? If so, where does that runway go? And then as part of that discussion, what is the best way to maintain a trail? It could be around the runway. It could be at some point under the runway. It could be both. And quite frankly, there are probably other options that we did not get far enough down the path to even explore. So I would hesitate to say tonight this is how the trail would be done, because there's a public process that will help us decide that.
How would you, as the leader of the airport, try to respond positively to the needs of the community for a contiguous trail that has amenities and is as far from bad stuff as possible?
I think we would hope to engage in a process very similar to what we've done for the current construction effort of 7 Right. Very early on, for those that are not familiar, we are completing a 1,500-foot extension of the southern east-west runway to the west, and that impacted what is known, I believe, as the Sisson Loop Trail. And so we talked to the Nordic Ski Association and discovered that there were existing problems with those trails. In many cases, the trail ran along the access road that was used to maintain the FAA facilities. So every winter it would snow, and as soon as the facilities needed to be worked on, someone would go out and plow the snow off the road, which was also the ski trail. And that was not very convenient or conducive to good skiing. So what we were able to do in this construction project was to actually allocate the money to relocate and separate the trail from the road. And so in the end, the Nordic Ski Association was very happy with the improvement and enhancement of the trails due to the construction effort. And in fact, at the public hearing on that project, they were the first to speak and endorse the project. We would hope to have a very similar process with the users of the coastal trail to determine how to best meet their needs and desires.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Parrott? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're going to take about a 5-minute break right now, and we'll get started again at 7:30. Calling the public hearing back to order. We're dealing with case 2011-090, the comprehensive plan for West Anchorage District Plan. We've heard from the airport, and now we'll continue with the public hearing. Again, I remind you, if you're representing groups such as a community council, things of that nature, you have 5 minutes. If you represent yourself, you have 3 minutes. When you come up, please state your name for the record, and then indicate whether you're a 3-minute or a 5-minute person, so we can push the button here and keep the little machine tracking your time. We also have a way to catch people that are trying to testify twice, because I happen to have a list here of the people that testified at the last meeting. So if you're trying to sneak in twice, we'll just chase you off. So who would like to testify first? Please, sir.
My name's John Armand Dickens, and I'm a 3-minuter, and I got my stopwatch ready. So I'm starting now.
Could you state your name again, please, sir?
John Armand Dickens.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, as a board and commission type person, I want to thank you all for being board and commission types, because I've served on municipal and state boards and commissions for many years, and it's the hardest job that I love that I never got paid for, at least not in money, and I really appreciate you and know that you work very hard. I come here today because I believe, first disclosure, I fly on airplanes. I work at the airport. My wife and I have a house in Bethel. And in the bush, whether you like it or not, you got 1 foot in Anchorage, because all of our grub comes through the airport. We're kind of like the cargo cult. We worship the freighter gods. It's like, how come there's no avocados? Well, the airplane turned around. So we're like beholden to all of you Anchorage folks. I grew up in Turnagain, and then I moved to the Sand Lake Wilderness area as a young fella. So I lived on the north and the south of the airport. And my dad worked for Ween back in the day. But I tell you, this is an issue that's been going on for a long time. My old friend who came up in 1924 told me about what a big controversy Merrill Field was, because it was so far out of town. The same thing with the Anchorage International Airport. It was so far out of town. What are you, nuts? They're never going to build around that. But of course, we all know that's different. I remember in the high school at Diamond High, what a big issue the north-south runway was. And one of my best friends' families were so upset that they literally sold their house and moved away. And I miss them still to this day. So it's been a thing that's going on. When I think about what it's like now if we didn't have the north-south runway, it's hard to imagine what would happen, how much more dangerous it would be. So I would like to support the administration of the airport in this land swap. I believe it is a legitimate attempt to have a win-win-win situation for everyone. I want to remind you all that this is not just a Turnagain issue, nor a West Anchorage issue, nor even an Anchorage issue. This is an issue that affects the very future of the state of Alaska, the future of our country, America, the future of North America, and the future of the world, is whether or not we are going to let our airport grow as it needed. You know, I work out at the airport. My job makes me move back and forth from the bush a lot. And the airport, they have done everything they can. They have been good people. They don't have to let us use the Connors Lake Dog Park, but they do. They have done everything they can to be good. They are good people. They live in our town. They don't want to ruin the bike trail. You know, we all want the bike trail. We all want the airport. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Dickens? Thank you for your testimony, sir. Don't be shy. Please come forward.
Hi, my name is Mark Wiggin. I'm a resident of Turnagain, a member of the Turnagain Community Council Board. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I do want to echo that gentleman's comments about my thanks to all of you who serve on various commissions, because it is in times. I'm sure there's a lot of work. I want to, although take a different position from the previous speaker, in that I want to voice opposition to the land trade. First and foremost, I'm here to state support for the Turnagain Community Council submitted comments on the West Anchorage plan on September 12th, I believe it was. There was an awful lot of very good and hard work, public meetings, and then members of the TCC board. So any of you who have seen those, I would like to voice support. I would like to focus my attention, though, strictly on opposition to the land trade. I do not believe it's an essential component. I do not believe it should be approved. And I do worry about the integrity and the longevity and, frankly, the continuity of the coastal trail and how that might be affected. We've heard earlier from the airport administration confidence in the public process to protect the coastal trail in the future should this trade go forward and should they make plans that may need to be rerouted. I must respectfully admit that I'm not quite so confident in that public process when it comes to an inner workings between the airport and the municipality and the residents. So I'll end my comments there. I would like predominantly to reiterate my opposition to the trade, the land swap. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiggins. Is there any questions for Mr. Wiggins? Thank you for your testimony, sir. Please come forward.
Thank you very much. And my name is Sharon Cisna, and I'm a 44-year resident of Alaska, and a huge part of that has been in Anchorage. 44 years ago I came to Anchorage, and really have very strong feelings about your importance, how in our municipality with the challenges that we have, it's planning, it's looking how we do this, how we put the pieces together. They're really critical. And Mr. Dickens really appreciated how he started out talking about the future of our town and how much things have changed, how much actually they're changing right now. And yet there's one way that really hasn't changed much at all, and that is we're still somewhat colonial. We still are getting most of our income from multinationals outside of our communities in Alaska. And what we don't have that I saw in Seattle, where I was raised, was a lot more planning and a lot more thought about developing the different assets of that community. And one of the features that makes it really difficult for Anchorage in Alaska to be able to make the kinds of efforts that you're trying to do is the turnover that we have, and it's a fairly hefty turnover. And the people in Anchorage right now don't really remember how much effort has gone into developing the airport, the parks, all of the different features that we have in our community have had a huge amount of effort and energy. And the park system itself, the trails, all of those pieces, people have gone to enormous efforts over time to put those pieces in place. And it's not really understood that has happened. In the past 13 years, I've put my energies into really looking at things from the state point of view. But what I have seen is the costs that come to our different communities when we really don't build the assets that we have and really highlight those. One of the huge ones in Anchorage is the incredible trail system, and one of the real jewels is the coastal trail system. And that is something, when the effort was finally put in place and the trail went out to Point Morenzoff and beyond, that was a huge amount of years and effort that took that to happen. Our airport has had the same kind of effort in it.
Please summarize.
Thank you very much. The important thing is to make sure that what we do is balanced. I don't see the kind of planning going on in this process, and it sounds like the airport has done some fine things with neighbors, but I don't see the kind of conversation that needs to take place here to move ahead on this kind of thing until there really is an effort to bring people together on this. Some of the things that, for instance, there's a train that goes to the airport, and it doesn't get used in dealing with transportation for workers, that kind of thing. There's things, obviously, that aren't being thought of and planned through.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Sisna.
you.
Any questions for Ms. Sisna? Ms. Pease.
Yes, Ms. Sisna, you clearly have a long-range view of land use planning. I think we owe a lot to you for your efforts on Chugach State Park's dedication, so thank you for that. Given your insight in the past and your understanding that public effort, tremendous public effort, and I would say governmental effort too, is necessary for a big land exchange. Do you know enough about the parcels to know whether there's, limited or targeted effort is appropriate at this time?
I don't know anywhere near enough to be, for instance, in a position where I'd be making a decision of any kind, that's for sure. But what I do know is that things are happening without there being much knowledge about them, and I think the person who may speak right after me is going to be speaking to some of that. I'm out there a lot. I'm a bike rider and months away from 70, but my husband and I are out there a lot, and we're on the land and see it from not as close as I'd like it to be. But I don't think there's enough of a discussion yet. That's what I believe.
Thank you.
Mr. Phelps, did you have a question?
No.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Sisna? Thank you for testimony.
Thank you, members of the Commission. My name is Barbara Hood. I'm a resident of East Anchorage now, but I used to be a resident of Turnagain. I was a founding member in 1994 of the original Friends of the Coastal Trail, which worked to protect and create Point Woronzof Park. And I was also a member of the Parks Commission as vice chair for 3 years recently. I'm here to speak against specifically the land trade that's proposed for a number of reasons, and I'll try to make my points very quickly. Number one, I think it does betray the citizen effort that went on in 1994 to create Point Woronzof Park. I have with me the newspaper from July of 1994 that talked about the land swap that was created at that time that was approved by Governor Hickel and Mayor Rick Mystrom. In this article it says, to protect the popular coastal trail, a 190-acre parcel surrounding the trail to the east and west will be dedicated as parkland, making it permanently off limits to development. Governor Hickel was quoted in the article as saying, I think we got a very fair deal. Both the airport and Friends of the Coastal Trail made some sacrifices to work it out. I think 17 years ago this community had a very big controversy on its hands. 10,000 people signed a petition to protect that land, and the community responded appropriately and fairly. And today we are back to square one after many efforts over the years on behalf of the airport, by the airport, to reclaim that land. The citizens spoke pretty loudly, and I think planners and park protectors and people who care about the citizen voice ought to be listening more carefully and certainly more thoughtfully than they have to the voices that we had at that time. The second point, I would question the assumption that you can't protect Connors Bog and the other recreational area without making this land trade go forward. At the time we were fighting the battle, we were told as a community that we couldn't have a Sand Lake school unless we traded the land to the airport. Well, we managed to do both. I think there are possibilities here that haven't begun to be explored, and I would ask you to much more carefully look at those options. This could be a win-win, but it's certainly not a win-win now, not a win-win for the people who fought very hard for that land. And I echo what Representative Sisna said, that a lot of the amenities this community has are amenities that come out of the sweat and blood of citizens who come together to protect things and make this a nice place to live. And when you ignore that, you do so at your peril. You do so at what, it makes people question what we are as a community and what we value as a community. So that was point 2. Point 3, I do believe there will be a planning process if the airport were to get that land, but none of us would have a very big role in that process. And I've been a part of the airport's planning open houses and public process, and it's a very, very discouraging process. Once you give the land to the airport, don't plan on having a very large role in how it's used, because they don't participate, they aren't bound by municipal planning. The citizen process that I've been part of many times is one where you go, you express your concern, and you leave, you go home, and the same thing happens that was going to happen, because they aren't obliged to bring that decision to anybody like you or anybody like the Assembly or anybody who could change their mind or do it differently. They pretty much come out at the end with what they started with. That was
summarize.
Okay, thank you. Basically, in the absence of a compelling need by the airport at this time for that land, which they have not shown and they haven't even tried to show, I think the director says they haven't even begun that process. Why are we even considering including a transfer of land to the airport, the land that this community has staked out carefully over the years and should protect? Certainly not in this planning cycle. This is one planning cycle. We'll have others. You don't need to do this today, and I urge you not to.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps?
I want to go back to your first point. It involves the creation of the Warrensoff Park. And I'm not really familiar with that process. Can you tell me a bit about it, and specifically what was involved in terms of the trade-off between the city and the airport?
Thank you very much. I can explain what I know. At that time, Heritage Land Bank owned not only Point Warrensoff Park, but about 190 other acres that the airport was ultimately transferred. What happened is it was originally the entire parcel was going to be transferred under the Fink administration, and as a result of the citizen action and a lot of negotiation that went on, basically the parcel was split. And I have an illustration from the box at that time that Mayor Mystrom and Governor Hickel both looked at. This is something we created in an effort to outline the green part of this is a buffer that we agreed would go to the coastal trail and become parkland. The other areas are the areas that the airport agreed they would take for their future needs. And so this isn't the ultimate. This is the drawing that we worked on to come up with with the trade plan that went forward. The airport got a large chunk of land. The community got a large chunk of land. As to how it worked, I think ultimately the mayor helped negotiate it because it was involving the airport. Governor Hickel was involved, and I think both parties agreed to this, and then it was submitted to the Assembly for approval. They approved it, and they dedicated the parkland.
So what, in addition, well, I guess I'm not clear yet as to what the airport received.
They received the uplands. Basically, we were concerned about the integrity of the coastal trail. So the park follows some natural boundaries, I believe, although actually I have a copy of the ordinance and it has a much more detailed map. The airport received the uplands above. There is a ridge line, a natural ridge line that they tried to follow. I don't have... I mean, I could show you. I certainly could provide.
Actually, I would like to see the map. I guess the question I would also have is those uplands were owned by the city?
The uplands were owned by the city, the Heritage Land Bank, and they were transferred to the airport as part of the deal.
I see. So I guess the other part of it is that, tell me again the citizen effort that was involved in this.
Well, we learned early on, well, I shouldn't say early, in March of '94, we learned that this was in the works, and we learned that the mayor was planning to transfer the land. We went to the Assembly, we organized Friends of the Coastal Trail in the spring of '94, and we worked very hard to meet with Assembly members and go through the public process. The Assembly didn't agree with us, and in May of '94 voted in support of the transfer. We organized an initiative campaign and collected 10 to 11,000 signatures of concerned citizens who did not want this to go forward. And it was after those signatures had been collected and after Mayor Fink term of office ended and Mayor Mystrom's began, that Mayor Mystrom approached this from a perspective of trying to seek a resolution that would be a win-win for the community. And I think at that time, we all felt it was a win-win. The airport, Governor Hickel certainly, maybe not the airport officials, but Governor Hickel on behalf of the airport, Mayor Mystrom on behalf of the city, and the citizens group that had advocated for this protection. I think, in fact, the article that I quoted from talks about what a win-win it was viewed as at the time. And I guess my last pitch would be that, the democratic process relies on citizen involvement and with citizen action. And I think that's why I'm feeling a little bit like this is something that we as citizens came forward to work on and protect for our community, and it's apparently very short-lived or not well respected, and that concerns me a lot.
Is it possible to get more detailed information on that land exchange that occurred at that time?
I would be very happy to provide that.
I really like to see that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Let's see, Ms. Pease.
Yes. A couple of questions. If the current staff's come back to the commissioners who have expressed concern on this with possible language that a comprehensive land trade should be a last resort after all other acquisition methods for acquiring MOA's desired lands were exhausted, what is your reaction to that?
I never like language like that because I think you look as hard. I mean, and if I knew people were looking as hard as they possibly could to turn every stone, I might have faith in something like that. But frankly, I think my concern is why are you even thinking about it if there's no need? And you're in one planning cycle today, but this isn't the only planning cycle that you'll have for West Anchorage or for the airport. And I don't know why. It would to me take some pretty compelling circumstances to change what we've already done, and the idea that we would do them with no knowledge about how that land would be used or whether that land's even needed at this time, and with no planning in place that we can play any meaningful role in. I just don't understand. I don't think I would agree to that language, but I guess if it's that language or the current language, I would prefer it. But
okay.
To me, it's just not a road to go down.
All right. Two more.
Go ahead.
You also mentioned that if the land trade were to take place now, by the time the Coastal Trail realignment were to happen, the public would be a bystander since the airport has its own planning process. In that case, before any parcel trades, whether it's Woronzof Park or any other parcel, is there any citizen guarantee or design stage that you think would need to be met before a land trade took place? Is that something you've given thought? You don't want to be shut out as a citizen.
Right.
So how would you ensure that you weren't going to be shut out? And parts of the trail will probably be realigned for erosion or whatever else. Mm-hmm. Is there any process that gives you faith that it will be done correctly?
I don't know how, and I'll tell you why. In a different dispute with the airport at a later date, we worked very, very hard and it was involving Turnagain Bog. I used to live in Turnagain. We were trying to, there was some wetlands development in Turnagain Bog. Another citizens coalition, Friends of Turnagain Bog, had worked hard to protect some land. We failed on almost every point we worked hard on within the public process, but we gained a commitment from the airport and the Assembly that any future planning of Turnagain Bog would occur jointly. Well, some years later, after that ordinance was passed, that when the West Anchorage plan was in the works, I went to a meeting where there were municipal people talking about the airport plan, and the municipal leaders that were there hadn't heard of this ordinance, weren't apparently aware of it, and I felt like that was a lot of work down the drain. So I'm not sure what would give me confidence other than a public process like this, where citizens can come, speak to people who have decision-making authority, expertise, and who can weigh in and make a different decision. Because if you're just going to tell people your concerns, but they're the ultimate decision makers, and they're the ones that came up with the original plan in the first place, how likely is it, and what incentive do they have to change the outcome? I've never been satisfied with that kind of public process. It's a very different process than this process. I mean, they don't even tape it generally. It was something that you just came and it was an open house. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to the open houses, but they're different than public hearings. you aren't testifying, you're sort of sharing and looking at drawings, and you go away, and they maybe take your comments into account, maybe they don't, but there's no sense that you've had a chance to make a difference.
And one more question. One of the questions I'm still trying to get the answer to is on-site mitigation versus off-site mitigation for airport wetlands, and maybe that's something we'll probably need to ask the airport representative that. But is that anything that you recall the public speaking up for?
In the coastal trail, it wasn't a big issue. Some years later in Turnagain Bog, it was a huge issue, and we urged the airport to do on-site mitigation. But when I said we failed on every point, that was one of them. The mitigation went to Clat Bog. And we would have been happy as a neighborhood, I think, if they had done some mitigation within Turnagain Bog. There's a huge wetland, the finest wetland in Anchorage at that time, that they could have used to mitigate, and instead they went to South Anchorage. Now, that project was ended. I don't think it proceeded. I don't think the mitigation ever took place for a number of other reasons, but I'm not up to speed on that right now. I'm sorry about what actually happened in that instance. But I think mitigation on site, I mean, to me, it's not really mitigation if it's not near what you're mitigating, frankly.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Phelps. It's obvious that you have a very good knowledge of this particular issue as well as other issues relating to the airport development and the environs of it, actually. Do you have a list of what you consider to be sensitive areas that we should be protecting as part of this process, or do you think that the recommendations of the Turnagain Community Council adequately identify the sensitive areas that need protection?
I think Turnagain Community Council is one of the finest community councils in town, even though I'm now a member of Bashir Community Council, and I would defer to them on that. I have not been part of their process on identifying those areas, but I know that they are an active council and an extremely thorough and dedicated group of people.
Any further questions for Ms. Hood?
I thought of one more.
Yeah. Okay, Ms. Pace.
Ms. Hood, do I understand that you're an attorney?
Yes.
When you were meeting with airport officials, did you get the sense that it was important to have a great deal of legal expertise? Were sort of discussion of the regulations, was that any kind of impediment to effective planning by yourself as a citizen or the municipality's representatives?
I'm not sure that it was the legal. I mean, I think it certainly helps to have a legal background, but I think that what was overwhelming was just the amount of material and detail, but there were non-attorneys in our group that did a lot of sorting through the details and organizing the arguments. I think it's an extremely onerous process to take on an airport in any way, shape, or form, it's just a lot of resources there that you're up against. And I feel that as citizens it's really hard, and that's why it's so discouraging to keep fighting the battles over and over and over again.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
My name is Dirk Sisson. As the previous speaker, I used to live in Turnagain, and now I live in East Side. I want to speak specifically to the Point Warrenzoff Park exchange to the airport in the West Anchorage District Plan. On September 27th, 1967, this was during the construction of the first north-south runway, the Anchorage Times had this to say: Warrenzoff Park, quote, will occupy 394 acres of the beautiful rolling wooded land in the Point Warrenzoff area, a site that could become world famous for beauty and utility. Warrenzoff Park will encourage young and old to go in the snow with all the latest recreational gadgets. The park will pay for itself, improve living conditions, and enrich the souls of the people who use it. This was in 1967. In 1994, I helped negotiate with Governor Hickel and Mayor Mystrom the creation of Warrenzoff Park. Specifically, it was the area south of the wastewater treatment facility. It was the culmination of a long-fought battle between the airport, the municipality, Friends of the Coastal Trail, and Alaska Center for the Environment. The extensive use of Point Warrenzoff Park includes bikers, hikers, walkers, skiers. It is constantly used between Point Warrenzoff and Kincaid. It is a unique place to observe a wide variety of wildlife. It would be a shame to have this unique area bulldozed off the face of the map and covered with asphalt and concrete. Once the runway wipes out this naturally beautiful land, there will be no giving it back to the people for parks and open space. I urge you to keep Warrenzoff Park intact in the current West Anchorage District Plan. Please do not allow it to be taken over by the airport. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Sisson? Thank you, sir.
Members of the Commission, my name is Tom Meacham. In my real life, I'm a lawyer concentrating on public land issues, among other things, and I've had more than 40 years of experience with Alaska, federal, state, and local public lands. However, I'm a relative newcomer to the present issue. I'm adamantly opposed to including the proposed airport municipal land exchange in the West Anchorage District Plan. I think it's entirely premature for a number of reasons. I am happy to hear Mr. Parrott talk about the EIS process that the airport will undertake with its comprehensive plan, because among other things it will be required legally to analyze its assumption that the airport can continue to expand as the need arises in its present location. There are several, in fact a number of cities in the lower 48, such as Washington, D.C. and Denver, that have discovered that it's just impossible to meet the desires of its original airport and its original location, and they have both undertaken over the past decades a comprehensive relocation of their main airport. And I'm also happy to hear Mr. Parrott discuss the public process that he feels will be necessary in analyzing both the airport's comprehensive plan and a proposed land exchange. As you're aware, Point Warrenzoff Park is dedicated parkland. A vote of the people would be required before this parcel could even be considered as possible trading stock. That's required by the Charter, Section 10.02, parentheses 8. Therefore, I think it's entirely inappropriate to include this parcel as part of a potential land exchange until the public has first spoken on the issue of whether it should be undedicated as a park. Certainly, the coastal trail is not just the paved surface of the trail. It's its surroundings, it's its environment, its views, and I think that taken in balance, the proposed exchange parcels of Connors Lake Park and Little Campbell Lake, if they were to come to the municipality in return for losing the coastal trail along the Point Warrenzoff Park, that would not be a fair trade at all. As has been perhaps stated, the fact that the airport sees Connors Lake Park and Little Campbell Lake as potential trading stock means that they are excess to the airport's needs for airport purposes. There's no reason that these parcels should not already be eligible and available for transfer to the municipality if, in fact, they could be considered as trading stock, because, by definition, they would have no direct airport purpose in any event. Certainly, parks and open space uses for these parcels are the most compatible uses adjacent to an airport. They're low impact, minimal improvement, and compliance with any airport height restrictions. And I would like to point out that some of the airport lands that are proposed for exchange are, I believe, subject to pending municipal land selection under the state statute that grants the municipality a certain amount of acreage of state-owned land within its boundaries. I believe the municipality should vigorously pursue these land selections to a conclusion and to pursue alternative compensation from the state if required. I think that covers the points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Meacham? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, wait, sir, just Ms. Pease had a little slow on the think
Sorry.
there.
Push the button.
Go ahead.
Not hard enough. Yes, Mr. Meacham, you mentioned some of the, if I understood correctly, that last point, some of the proposed land swap parcels you believe are still under municipal selection. Is that what I understand?
I believe, Ms. Pease, that the I looked at this issue some months ago, and there was a fairly detailed map of lands that the municipality had under municipal land selections that had not yet been transferred to it. And I believe the indication was that some of these lands are held by the state, but through the airport. And I think, as I recall, the outcome of this pending land selection was these lands should be approved to the municipality if okayed by the FAA, and that's really all it said. And I need to satisfy myself whether the FAA has authority to deny these lands coming to the municipality on the basis that the airport might like to use them for trading stock, as opposed to denying these selections on the basis that they're either needed for direct airport purposes or that they should be restricted so that there's no conflicting height development or anything like that next to the airport. But I don't know right now which lands we're talking about because I don't have a list, but there were some that are subject to potential, or not potential, but actually existing municipal land selections, and the municipality has not, to my knowledge, satisfied its entire land entitlement from the state. And I believe because there was not enough land within the municipal boundaries to grant it 10% of the state land within its boundaries, there was an agreed settlement between the state and the municipality as to exactly how much acreage the municipality would get and what those acres were, where they were. And I think some of this land may be involved in that.
We'll have to follow up on that. I know Mr. Phelps is familiar with land selections, but is my understanding correct then that if the municipality hasn't finalized its entire entitlement and there were perhaps airport surplus parcels, such as you mentioned, perhaps Connors Bog doesn't have a functional use, the city could perhaps select those? That would be an alternative.
Ms. Pease, I think the present status of matters is that the state, or the municipality has made all its selections, it's filed all its selections, but not all of them have been granted because, among other things, some were within airport boundaries and were subject perhaps to this FAA requirement, or at least approval of the FAA. And I don't know on what legal basis the FAA can either approve or deny a municipal land selection of state land that's not being used for airport purposes or is not useful for direct airport purposes. But the selections have already been made. They had to be made by a certain date. Mm-hmm. And so there are some that are still pending and haven't been transferred to the municipality yet.
Okay. And one other question. Earlier in your testimony, you stated that it wouldn't be a fair trade to give away Ronsoff Park for Connors Bog and Little Campbell Lake. Is that any kind of assessment made on your land expertise, or is that more of an intuition, a feeling?
I'd have to say it's an intuition because I'm not an appraiser and I couldn't tell you whether that was an acre for acre equal value trade at all. And I think it would be difficult for any appraiser probably to evaluate lands that are being used for parks. I guess the highest and best use of all those lands might be, residential or something related to that, and you really can't evaluate them on that basis. But I think when you look at the coastal trail, you don't just look at the Warrensoff section. You have to look at the entirety of the coastal trail. And if the loss of that section means that the integrity of the entire trail is compromised or is reduced from what we presently have, then I think, at least my view is that section of the coastal trail would have a higher value as part of the overall trail than the Connors Bog and the Little Campbell Lake parcels might have. But that's just a subjective view.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Meacham? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just make a comment here.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, there is a settlement agreement, and it is relatively simple to check on the status of those parcels, and we'll do that.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, my name is Chris Havicht, and I'm Vice President of the Turnagain Community Council. I'd like to take my 3 minutes here to reiterate some of the written comments sent by the Turnagain Community Council regarding the land use map for the West Anchorage District Plan. The West Anchorage District Plan land use map, which will become an integral element of the Anchorage 2020 Comprehensive Plan and will guide future land use decisions, should reflect the community's long-term vision of land use and not regardless of who owns the land. Not all airport property should be designated as major transportation facility, as shown in Exhibit 4A in the land use plan. Instead, parcels within the airport boundaries that TCC recommends be acquired by the municipality through purchase title or conservation trail easements, and I'll list these to you in just a minute, should be designated as other areas that function as park and natural resources. These include sections of the Coastal Trail, Little Campbell Lake, Turnagain Bog, Spenard Beach Park, northern area of Connors Bog, DeLong Lake Park, Raspberry Road Buffer, and Coulis Road Buffer. This approach is much more consistent with previous planning efforts back in 1982 and more recently in 1995, and these planning efforts were both for the Anchorage Comprehensive Plan Generalized Use Plan and in regards to the draft airport master plan, comments that were made by the municipality. No alternative land use classifications on the land use plan map should show municipal land as major transportation facility. This includes the municipally designated parkland of Point Warrenzoff Park, Coastal Trail, Greenbelt buffering near the sewage treatment plant or heritage land bank land west of the airport that serves as an essential coastal trail greenbelt buffering from current and future airport operations and development. We do not feel that the alternative land use classification on the land use plan map is adequate either in its size or in its designation for the community's best interest and does not reflect the long-held community interest, users, and values. That's my testimony. All right, one last thing. I've got petitions here that have been signed by 44 more people. These petitions are the same as the ones that Kathy Gleason handed to you last week.
Okay, fine. Go ahead and bring them up here, and we'll get them entered in the record. The secretary knew this was going to happen, so she brought her little registration thing with her. Okay, while you're doing that, is there any questions? Yes, Mr. Phelps.
I couldn't write fast enough. The areas that you would like to protect, I have, has been the Coastal Trail, Turnagain Bog, the Coulis Buffer, and North Connors Bog, but there were others. What were the others?
I can give them to you, but they're also in written documents that were given to the council by the Turnagain Community Council. So Little Campbell Lake, there are 4 sections of the Coastal Trail. Parcel 3, which is southwest corner of the east-west runway. Parcel 5, which is the West Air Park tract south of Point Woronzof. Parcel 7, which is Point Woronzof Overlook. Parcel 8, which is the east side of Point Woronzof Bluffs. Parcel 9 is Turnagain Bog. Parcel 11, Spenard Beach Park. Parcel 12, northern area of Connors Bog. Parcel 14 is DeLong Lake Park. Parcel 28 is Raspberry Road Buffer. And Parcel 29, Coulis Road Buffer.
Thank you.
Any further questions from Mr. Haddock? Thank you for your testimony, sir.
Hello, my name is Sid Atwood, and I really want to thank the board for all your service. And I'm going to try to talk a little bit slower. I don't know if it's just my ears getting old, but the sound system isn't too good for me. My wife testified a few minutes ago, and I'm happy to say that's Representative Sharon Cisna. And she mentioned that I was going to say something that ties it together. Well, I work part-time out at Clitheroe. That's the Salvation Army Drug and Alcohol Treatment Center out at Point Woronzof, Clitheroe Drug and Alcohol Treatment Center. I like to say that I'm retired, but they keep calling me, and I'm on call, so I'm there quite a bit. often will do a trade bicycle ride. We ride about 12 miles from our house in the Airport Heights area. We never cross a road. We go all the way out to Clitheroe. And because my wife is nice enough to bring the car out, she gets to ride back. And so it works very nice. The reason why I wanted to talk about that, it's a beautiful trip. There's no question about that. It's kind of rough for an old guy going up the hill. But it is, and I'm trying to slow down. That is my speaking. But anyway, my different point that I don't think has been probably thought of at all is the facility that I work at. And of course, the road to get there. Any expansion would take that road away, therefore, so goes the Drug and Alcohol Treatment Center. When I first came to Alaska, imported by my bride, I knew that the drug and alcohol problem here in the state is really tremendous. It's very big. And the particular facility that I'm at is in a wonderful location. If you really wanted to leave, you've got to think about how far it is to walk out of there, for one thing. And the other thing is that it's a remote site. You definitely get to work on yourself on recovery. It's something that's very important. There's only about 17 detox beds in this greater Anchorage area. There are some also in Fairbanks. But I'm talking about the detox itself. We've only got 5 right now at this time at Clitheroe. But anyway, the fact that drug and alcohol is such a big problem, and we of Anchorage or of Alaska have many of the problems that my wife has worked and talked about so much, and that is the problems of suicide and etc.
Please summarize, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Frederick. Sir, if you'd stay at the podium, we've got some questions here.
Thank you.
Mr. Frederick.
Through the chair, it's my understanding that Clitheroe is a relatively unique facility in Anchorage, that there really aren't other places to go to for the services that are provided there. Is that true?
That's quite true. There are a couple of others that are fairly similar, but yes, for long term, and I've met many people that have been through there and are productive people in the rest of the state of Alaska. I've ran into them in Fairbanks and in the nice town of Juneau that I get to go to quite a bit. It is, and I was going to say something else too, but I forget.
But my point in asking that question is that it's a valuable commodity in Anchorage, and would be missed if it were eliminated.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is David Landry, and I'm here to thank you, actually, first of all, for taking your time over and over again to do this. I'd like to speak in opposition to the land trade, and for a couple reasons, one of which that became clear tonight as I heard people speaking is that it's kind of a pig in a poke. You're being asked to give away a very valuable asset to the city for an undefined reason as of yet, and for an undefined solution, the coastal trail rerouting. There's no, public process around that yet. If this were to ever happen, I think that should all be right up front, like the first thing that's discussed. How is this going to be implemented? What does it look like? This is it's just like a blind trade, which really doesn't make sense to me. The line of questioning that Mr. Wilson was pursuing with Mr. Parrott seemed like something that really needs to be followed in a long-range plan like this. I moved out to Sand Lake in 1964 with my family. I've been around the airport a lot over the years. And my perception of the airport, and, God bless everybody that works at the airport, but it's pretty ravenous organization for land, and I understand that. And, you know, it is in a very prescribed boundary. And if getting the Point Warrenzoff Park and, you know, using that up is a short-term fix to a long-term problem, it's a very expensive short-term fix because that is not replaceable, and it's well-loved and well-used by people in town. So I really thought your line of questioning was spot on. It's like, where is the airport going? I mean, is it as an optimistic a future for the airport as Mr. Parrott is suggesting? You know, if it really needs to expand a lot, it has to go somewhere else, or parts of it have to go somewhere else. And I think that should be part of whatever decision you make. But to summarize, I'm against the land trade as it stands. Thank you.
Okay, sir, just a minute. We may have some questions here. Is that Langdon?
Landry.
Landry, I'm sorry.
L-A-N-D-R-Y.
Okay, fine. Thank you for your testimony, sir.
Hi, my name is Michael Powell. I'm an Anchorage resident, and just speaking on behalf of myself. And I'm a very avid park user, particularly the Kincaid Park. And I don't have a whole lot more to add to the testimony that has been already stated, although just one point in regards to the comment about the Clitheroe Treatment Center. I actually have quite a lot of involvement in the substance abuse treatment services for our state, and happen to know that there is a provider in town that is trying to relocate and has found it nearly impossible. In fact, they have found it impossible to relocate a substance abuse treatment center in the municipality of Anchorage due to the restrictions on zoning requirements. So to probably not knowing much more detail about that particular situation, we would lose treatment capacity, which is already there's a dire need for more treatment, not to lose treatment. So I hadn't thought of that actually before I came up to testify. My concern more is also equally is that we don't have any more parkland. This is it. What we have is what we get. And if we lose parkland, we've lost it. And Point Warrenzoff is a world-class location. There's no equal. Campbell Lake and the dog park are nice places, but they are no equal to Point Warrenzoff. It is a world-class location that attracts people from all over the world. And I was in the lagoon, and I happened to have a biker from Germany and asking about the world-class the coastal trail, and that's Point Warrenzoff is a key piece of that. So I am testifying in opposition to this trade, particularly the loss of that park space. I think it is too valuable. I agree that the transportation needs of the municipality are also important, but at this point in time, that's not a necessity. Thank you.
Okay, just a minute, sir. Let's see if anybody has any questions. Any questions for Mr. Powell? Okay, thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Tim Pine. I'm a 30-year resident of the West Anchorage area. I'm a member of the Sand Lake Community Council. I'm a member of the Airport Communication Committee that former Mayor Matt Clayman started. I was a representative of the Sand Lake Community Council for the West Anchorage Development Plan Review, and also worked on the Cullis Air Force study as a representative of Sand Lake. So I believe I get 5 minutes. Is that correct?
Sir, are you speaking on behalf of Sand Lake or yourself?
Yeah. Sand Lake.
Okay, so you're representing Sand Lake Community Council?
That's correct.
Okay, fine. You got 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. So, as I said, I did participate in the review process of the development of the West Anchorage District Plan. I also coordinated with the other districts. We kind of formed a committee to review outside of the formal meetings we had. And these comments that I have are mostly about the West Anchorage District Plan. One comment that I'd like to make is I see a lot of comments being made about the land swap. And if you look at the West Anchorage District Plan, it's really a plan of what we're going to do, not or how we're going to arrive at conclusions as opposed to conclusions. And a land swap in the West Anchorage District Plan, to me, would seem out of place. Most of the other things involve additional work, more community involvement, not details. So to me, that land swap, it doesn't seem like it belongs in the plan. The first comment I have is, although the representatives of the community councils and the planning department did a lot of work, we have a great draft plan. I do not believe that this is a final draft plan. The one thing that I think is missing is community involvement. Yes, we had some representatives that helped put the thing together, but it was kind of the same people, the same 6 or 8 people. It really didn't get out into the community. The planning department did come to the community councils and made a presentation, but trying to present this plan that thick in 10 minutes, it's impossible. I really feel that this is a platform at this point for more community discussion and understanding. Otherwise, this plan will be the municipality's plan as opposed to the community's plan. And is the community serving the municipality, or is the municipality serving the community? I think more community involvement, more discussion of the issues and the options are needed at this point. We had a great opportunity to do that last winter. We finished our comments in November, but we didn't get the draft until this last summer. I myself was gone until May. I just got a copy. Came back last Thursday. I just got my copy, and I was on the committee. We did, there was a meeting. I was in town in July. There were, someone came in, and they had just found out that the planning process for this draft was going on. And to me, it shows that we haven't engaged the community. For this plan to be successful, it really needs, the details need to be fine. We have a great structure, but the details haven't, I think, been worked out. An example of that is kind of the language that we use. If you read through there, the language for the community is require. If you look at the airport, it's request. And there's an imbalance there. And sometimes there's reasons for that, but I don't think that the community understands that, and I don't think it's appropriate to require the community in the plan to do things like building codes and retrofitting and anything like that, and request the airport to participate in a planning process or a zoning process. There are some sections, I live off of Raspberry, and there's some sections that we firmly disagree with on section 1A-6, page 212, bullets 2, 3, 4, and 5. They describe details of berming. And let me give a little history. We've had a lot of conversations about how to separate the airport from the community, and the word berm keeps coming up. And berm means different things to different people. It solves different problems in different situations. It is not the solution. If you read through these bullets, we're proposing that is the solution, and I don't believe that that's the appropriate thing to do in this plan. It should be possibly, a berm might be the output of a process of review and discussion with the community, but I don't think that belongs in there now. And so we object to bullets 2, 3, 4, and 5. Especially bullet 5, that requires, and I'll read it, accommodate additional new access drives to the airport property and Raspberry Road.
Please summarize, sir.
Okay. There was a traffic study that said we could expect 7,000 new vehicles off of the airport property through 2 new driveways. We would like to change that to consolidate existing access roads into a frontage system on airport property. So I have more comments. I would like to submit them in a written process, and I'm open for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Ply?
Mr. Pine, Tim Pine.
Okay, Pine. Okay, Mr. Phelps.
Well, I actually have lots of questions, but I think it'd be better if you were to write out, to explain to us your remaining points in written form, and so we have that available to us. So identification, the way it would be helpful to me, should I say, is that if you have issues, I would suggest you do identify the page number involved, the recommendation involved, and what you disagree with and what you want changed to.
Okay.
Okay.
Ms. Pease?
Mr. Phelps covered it. I was looking at the Spenard Community Council's comments, and they didn't have the kind of detail he just mentioned where the certain language needs to change on a certain page, so that would be most helpful.
Any further questions? Mr. Phelps?
When do you think you might have that available?
Probably in a week. Our community council is meeting a week from tonight, and as I said, I've been out of town since May, so it'll probably be after the community council. I'll see what the latest input is from them.
Okay.
That was the beginning of the comments that I had at the beginning of the summer.
So you want to review some of the responses that you've developed with the community council first,
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. One thing about the response process, it's difficult to see what everybody else has responded. You kind of throw them into a pot and you don't hear. And it'd be better if we could get a better view of what everybody's saying. And the summertime is the worst time for a public review.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Nancy Desha. I'm speaking for myself as a resident of Anchorage, and I'd like to go back to the airport master plan that Mr. Parrott was discussing. He mentioned that the plan might begin as early as 2012 and hopefully be done in 2 years and perhaps even in 1, as I understood what he said. That's 3 months. 2012 is 3 months from now. And one of the first steps that happens in the EIS NEPA process is the development of alternatives. And so in theory, we could have a set of alternatives being developed 3 months from now for the master plan for the airport, while your commission is underway making a decision on a very small piece of this master plan that has significant repercussions. So I'd really encourage you to consider that time frame and that importance. Those alternatives are probably already being ruminated upon by the people in the airport, because if they aren't going to do it beginning January 2012 or sometime in 2012, they're going to have to hit the ground running and be lucky if they get it done in 2 years, let alone 1. So that was my first comment. My second comment is more from an engineering standpoint, and I'd just like to say that it's nice to talk about a tunnel under the coastal trail there, but the soil stability and the drainage problems that would be there, particularly the soil stability, it's a very fine to fine loose conglomerate, and with tremors or vibrations from the airport, not to mention earthquakes, I don't think I would want to be in that tunnel. Also, it would be a place for crime to gather. I think it would be a very good place. I wouldn't go in the tunnel probably in day or night. Also, there wouldn't be snow in the tunnel, which it is a trail. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered about this tunnel, and to throw that option out there as having perhaps people more naively say, yeah, that's a great option. Engineering comes first before that decision has to be made. So I think timing here is really critical on both the planning, the NEPA process, the CEQ, and the engineering, which I'm concerned about both of those things. Thank you.
Ma'am, could you give us your last name, please? We missed it the first time around.
Deschu, D-E-S-C-H-U.
Any questions for Ms. Deschu? Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Mike Coombe, and I appreciate very much every one of you taking your time when you do coming down here. This is quite a sacrifice, and I really appreciate it. I think that there are good things about this West Anchorage plan, and especially the fact that it takes into consideration that there are places along the coastal trail. There are places like Little Campbell Lake and the dog park all needing protection, and the fact that it takes those into consideration, I hope that those stay under consideration, because those areas do need protection, and I hope that you keep that in there. At the same time, the area at Point Warrensoff Park that the citizens of Anchorage worked very hard 17 years ago to protect, and to protect for the coastal trail, and I want to remind you, compromised a great deal to give land to the airport and then keep some land for the coastal trail protection. I think that if that land stays in as consideration under this plan as a potential trading ground to be traded away, then I think you would be breaking faith with the citizens of Anchorage, and there were thousands of them, actually. I heard some mention tonight about there's just a few people who are interested in taking care of this, but in truth, there were thousands of Anchorage residents who signed petitions and who worked hard to protect that land, who filled this assembly chambers many times, actually, in wanting to protect that land. I would urge you to keep the areas in the plan that are being urged to be protected. I urge you to consider purchasing those lands and keeping the purchase of those lands in this plan. But at the same time, I would say that it is very important for you to remove consideration of the Point Warrensoff Park from having the ability to be traded away, because it would break faith with the citizens of Anchorage. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Coombe? Ms. Pease?
Yes. Mr. Coombe, I don't know how involved you are in parks, or whether you were involved at all in the issue in 1994, but you did mention that there were thousands of people involved. Do you advocate acquiring the land, buying it? We have been told, and we know, that park bonds generally die. Do you have any enthusiasm or any realistic faith that if there were a specific bond for one of these supposedly much loved parks like Connors Bog, that could be an alternative?
Every once in a while they pass. I mean, it does happen occasionally. And I was very involved in this 17 years ago, and I did get to see all throughout the whole process what happened with this. But anyway, I do believe that we can have faith that there are some park bonds that pass, because it does happen. Usually the votes are very, very close, and if they lose by a small margin. if they win by a small margin as well.
Okay, I think that still supposes that the airport can relinquish the land, but you think there might be 10,000 dog park users?
I don't know about that.
Okay.
Mr. Phelps?
So I'm getting the impression that back in 1994, there are a lot of people that were involved in this. I think you used the word thousands, so I've got to believe that the assembly chambers here were filled up for a series of evenings. My understanding is that the Point Warrenzoff Park is a dedicated park. And if it's a dedicated park, to essentially remove the dedication, you have to have actually a vote of the people. It's a community-wide vote, as I recall. Given your experience, what do you think the likely outcome of a vote would be if taken now? Do you think the same level of interest would come to fore for the citizens of Anchorage, or do you think there would be less interest? What do you think the outcome might be?
I think that there is strong support in this community for the Coastal Trail, and I just want to say that it's really important to note the airport is the economic engine for Anchorage. It's a very important part of the city, and it's a great thing that it's here. I mean no disrespect to the airport, because I do believe that it's very important for this community. But at the same time, I know that the citizens of Anchorage care deeply about their coastal trail. I watched it happen back during that period of time, and I do believe that they'd be strongly in favor of it. What I don't want to see, though, is the community being divided as it was during that period of time. And I don't think that it's necessary to go through that. And I think that this moment in time is one where you can actually draw the line and say, no, we're not going to actually divide the community this time. We're going to do it the right way and make sure that we don't put the community through that again. That's my encouragement to you.
Mr. Wilson?
Is there room for compromise?
Well, there was certainly a big compromise last time, and you heard about it before. I mean, there was the property
on one side or on both sides?
Both sides. It was a hefty compromise.
What's the opportunity this time?
Well, the problem with talking about compromise on that park is that you heard Barbara Hood talk about where the lines are for the property. If you move that property line any more to the west, what you're going to hit is you're going to climb over the ridge line, and you're going to all of a sudden turn what right now is a really good buffer between the airport and the coastal trail into whatever property is developed. It becomes then part of the view and part of the sound of the coastal trail, which it isn't right at this moment, because that park is a really great buffer. But there's a ridge line there that protects it, and that's where the property line is.
So the ridge line is the line.
That's right. It's not exactly, because the park line is straight, but roughly, yes.
There is a ridge, and that's where the line has to be.
Correct.
No compromise.
Like I said, there was a huge compromise.
I'm just trying to point out that we're talking about working as a community. Our job is like yours as a citizen, is to figure out what's best for the community, all of the community. And in this case, this airport serves more than a municipal boundary, so it's a bigger community in a sense. But there's so many interests, so many perspectives to try to weave a solution that we cannot, I believe, operate as a democracy with immovable positions on either side.
And I think that's laudable. And at the same time, where do you end up drawing the line? Because last time there was an enormous compromise. This time we say, okay, well, we'll compromise a little bit more, until finally they've got what they wanted originally, which was build right up to the edge of the coastal trail. And I think you have to decide where you really need to draw the line, and also take into consideration that it was just a few years ago, in 2008, that the airport was talking about expanding and building a second runway, and the airlines were the ones that said no, they didn't really want that. I mean, they were the ones that signed a letter saying that they didn't need that, they didn't want that.
Yeah, the record shows that they didn't want it because of economic conditions. They didn't see it was needed for aviation purposes yet. They did not say they never needed it. Look at the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cruz?
Yeah. Down sometime in the future, ultimately the airport's going to expand. I don't think anybody's going to argue that point. It's just it's going to have to. And I think the rules that they are playing with the FAA and the government is going to dictate whether they like it or not, ultimately what card they'll have to play. So I'm kind of torn, because on one hand, the putting the proposed option of a land swap or trade as one of maybe many options tends to push the focus to the west side of the airport. Whereas if nothing was done, if nothing was put into some long-term plan to foster that, it actually could result in the airport expanding to the east side, which is where all the neighborhoods are. So I think the quandary I have is, do we try to put something in place now to give all the options, whatever they may be? Well, a land trade sounds like maybe one of them, to the as a tool for the future people that ultimately are going to decide this, whether it's 20 years or 30 years or 50 years down the road, and help them focus to one side of the airport versus the other. So my question to you is you brought up the subject about dividing Anchorage. This would, if we don't do something, if we don't put something in place to say we want you to look at this area versus another area, it will ultimately divide the neighborhoods around the Anchorage airport. And do you think that's good public policy? And what would you do to avert that?
I actually don't believe I mean, I heard these arguments back then 17 years ago. They were saying the same thing. And they now have a lot more property on the west side as a result of that whole effort. So they have that property now, but the hunger hasn't decreased. They want more. They'll want more. That'll be the nature of this until all of the land is in their hands. And I think that it's really important, rather than try to say, okay, it's this versus that. And I mean, you can look at it that way, but you can also look at what's the value of what you have, and are you going to stand up for what it is that you already own? Because while the airport is our economic engine and it is very important to this community, they will work to get everything that they can in their hands. We have to work as a community to make sure that we protect all the property that we have as well. I don't like them or us, but I also listened to the airport testimony, and they were very clear that every single piece of ground that they have, they intend to develop. I mean, that was the testimony I heard tonight.
Well, I think if history repeats itself, that's probably what will happen. The question is, as a planner, putting a plan out, do you try to mold it or direct that ultimately using all that land in a certain location, or do you not do anything and hope for the best? I mean, that's really what in my view, what the conundrum is here, is because if we don't do anything, then everything's on the table, and maybe that's the solution that the strongest win and the weakest don't. I'm trying to avoid that part. I'm trying to grasp if we're going to direct something, or giving them the tools to look at as many options as possible. Is that a good thing?
And I think ultimately the airport will, if they are given the choice to work within the land that they've got, they will better develop the land that they have. I mean, if you look at the Seattle airport, it's very hemmed in. It's a very tight space where they work. They've got communities surrounding them on all sides, but they've learned how to work within that given piece of property that they have.
The airport's taken a lot of neighborhoods, and they've continued to do that. It's grown, and there's some neighborhoods that just actually disappeared, especially with the latest expansion. And so that's I'm sure those neighborhoods aren't, the folks that were there weren't appreciative of that. And again, it's the darned if you do and darned if you don't type of thing. But I hear you about, placing residents against residents and neighborhood. Right now it's more of the neighborhoods versus the Anchorage, the airport vision versus the neighborhoods, but it could end up being neighborhood vision against another neighborhood division, one community council versus another. And I'm not saying today, but it could be 20, 30, 40 years from now. I'd like to avoid that somehow, if that's a possibility. Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
My name is Merle Akers. Last name is spelled A-K-E-R-S. And I am going to talk a little bit about the aviation aspect of this airport and how it affects the community and how it affects the general aviation. First of all, let's understand how this airport is managed. You have the state of Alaska has broken its airports down into two divisions. They have the international airports, and then they have the statewide airports. All airports are managed initially by the Commissioner of Transportation. To him, the Director of the Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Aviation answers to him, and Mr. Parrott answers to that gentleman. When they talk about having their planning sessions, it's much like one of the other people told you. They have these open houses. They come in. Sometimes they take some testimony. Sometimes they don't. And in the end, the plan comes out. Who made the plan? Who's making the plan for the next airport in Alaska? It's going to serve Alaska. Forget about Anchorage. Going to serve Alaska. Who is making that plan now? We don't have a commission. Somebody talked about Seattle. Seattle has a port authority. People, when they're going to make a plan or they're going to change a plan, that's all heard in public testimony. When the airport does anything here, it's done. You can come and talk to Mr. Parrott. You can talk to Mr. Wilson. You can talk to other people on the staff, and you tell them this is. When they show you a plan, and sure enough, when it comes out, it may not be the same plan that you saw. Never saw it before. And what does the growth of the airport do? Well, one of the things the growth of the airport has done, it has changed the traffic patterns all over town. We now have aircraft over the Turnagain area that 15 years ago weren't there. 20 years ago weren't there. When they built the Lake Hood Strip originally in the 60s, it was limited to 20. They told the public it would be limited to 25 aircraft, no commercial operators. They've had not one public hearing or anything, and that strip has expanded. There are two players at the airport. There's the airport itself, Mr. Parrott, and there's the FAA. The FAA itself is split. The air traffic controllers direct where the traffic goes. They direct the traffic right over the top of my house, tell the helicopters to come off International, right over the top of our house, and they hold there.
Please summarize, sir.
The noise issue is the same thing. They're bass backwards on the noise. They're telling you they're going to have in your plan here that the citizens are going to have to report their noise on the sale of their properties. What needs to happen is before they build these airports and increase the traffic out there, they need to address the noise issue up front and compensate the landowners that are affected, their properties are impacted and devalued by that. Thank you very much.
Any questions from Mr. Akers? Thank you, sir. Anybody else wish to testify? Because we don't get anybody up here to testify, I'm going to close the public hearing. So please come forward.
My name's Janine Shellhorn, and I'd like to thank you, the Commission, but I'd also like to thank the very informed people that have spoken tonight. I am not so informed as they are, but I really feel that I should stand up and say what I think is stating the obvious for most of the people who live in this town and use the coastal trail and use the properties surrounding the coastal trail. Point Woronzof is one of the most spectacular natural resources in our city. It is a great loss if we swap that area out to the airport, and that's a loss that we're not going to get back. So as a user, a very frequent user of that park and the entire area between Point Woronzof and Kincaid Park, I want to say that what hasn't been said yet is that many of us in this community, and some people are concerned about whether the community is really going to stand up and be vocal about this issue. And I'd like to say they are. We value what we call our urban wilderness, and that is slowly disappearing for us. That entire area is very rich wildlife habitat. It's an area that's accessible to all of us. It's an area where we can go and seek our way of being in nature and in our community, our city at the same time. And so I'm speaking in strong opposition to the land swap, and I'm sure I'll be a little bit more informed. I've learned a lot tonight, but I know this isn't just an issue that the community isn't going to stand up and talk about. And I think some of the things that have been raised today about divisions in the community and the very question of airport expansion, which is something we are constantly trying to draw a line around and have not been successful in doing. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Shellhorn? Is that correct? Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else wish to testify? Does anybody else wish to testify? Last call. Does anybody else wish to testify? Public hearing is closed. Matter rests with the Commission. Mr. Wilson.
This is not a simple one. And I suspect that it would be difficult for me to evaluate everything we have, plus the many attachments and additional pieces of information. I think one of the things that we could do, since there have been so many additional items since the last June document, the large document was prepared, if we could ask staff to do one more round of consolidating what has been, or consider, or set up a workshop for us to consider how to consolidate this thing, working with staff. Maybe it's a committee of the whole or something, but I sense that we're not ready to make a decision tonight.
Well, and I have a motion on the floor. It sort of snuck up on me because you turned green, and my eyes went to the green, and I didn't look over here on the motion to approve. So we have Ms. Dean has made a motion to approve, and it's been seconded by Mr. Pruz, and I'd like to hear Ms. Dean's motion.
My motion is to move into committee of the whole so that we can openly discuss how we want to proceed, which Mr. Wilson has already started in that direction.
Yes, okay. Well, so we have a motion moved to committee of the whole, been seconded by Mr. Pruz. Is there any objection? Okay, we are in the committee of the whole. So what do we want to do? We've started out with Mr. Wilson. I think you're suggesting that they basically take this document and I think you're saying update it so we can see what changes have transpired since it was drafted?
Yeah, this is a lot of information, and I hate to put that onto Theed and company there, but I really believe that to make a real intelligent decision, rationally derived, we need to go through it section by section after we've had a chance to pull together all the bits and pieces.
Okay, Mr. Parks.
Well, I too would agree that we probably don't have enough information to evaluate what we're looking at, and I think we need some more time, basically from the airport and from the public, to be consolidated to do a review.
Okay. Ms. Pease.
What's helpful in this, and it's a lot of work for staff, is to have the staff endorse changes in a single document. So since there have been several rounds of staff response, they aren't all in a single document right now. I mean, ideally, you have a copy that highlights the changes, but reprinting a document of this size would be exorbitantly expensive. One question I have, though, is on September 26th, we got some responses from the staff on previously submitted comments. There were, however, more written comments appended to that September 26th document. Then more testimony came in on September 26th, and now we've had more testimony tonight. So now I think we've closed the public hearing and we have all the testimony, but it would seem to me that there are several dates at which staff might have recommended that some of those changes be made, and they would need to be put all together in a document. There was also staff's response to Commissioner Phelps and to my comments. So having them all together by page and line is how we have proceeded before, as Chairman Isham knows. And then we have taken a whole session usually to go through them one item at a time. And in this case, there'd be several dozen at least. Unfortunately, it would appear that those of us who've done this before, Commissioner Isham and I, might not be sitting on the commission at that time. So I hate to suggest a process that I don't know whether this commission wants to follow. But that was how we have done it with some degree of thoroughness in the past.
Mr. Phelps.
I think that we're all saying pretty much the same thing, which is this is a very significant document. There are a lot of still unanswered questions. There have been a number of recommendations and staff responses over time. It really is going to be necessary to pull everything together, and I think we're all saying that. I think that the way that Ms. Pieces has suggested is actually the way to go. We're quite familiar with that process. It basically is starting from page 1 and going chapter by chapter, and then you identify the issue associated with a particular page, and then you give a staff response, and if there's a need for or appropriateness for a recommendation, they will identify the recommendation. then unfortunately, or rather unfortunately, we have the opportunity of going through it item by item in some sort of reasonable way. And the way it has been done in the past is that if there's, as we go through it, if there's no objection to a particular item, it just goes through. It's the items that we have concern about or we object to that we pull from that and then discuss. And so that was a pretty good process before. We did it for Title 21. This is a large enough document to do something like that again.
I also think that that's the way to go because it does give you a framework to operate around. And quite honestly, by the time this gets done, Ms. Pease and I aren't going to be here. So it's going to be your guys' problem to figure out how to do this thing. But it is a fairly decent model, and it works. Because staff will take and identify it line by line. You go through. If everybody agrees, fine. There's no discussion. You only discuss those things that you disagree on. But you literally have to go through every single item. Now, I don't know if it's really necessary to redo this public hearing draft dated July 2011, because I think that's the document that everybody's been working off of. So we really, I think, just ought to have the changes based on this document, because I think that's what people have been using as they've gone through. I think you've got two of them, one dated July and one dated March. And the March was the earlier document, and I don't know what changes occurred between then and July. Mr. Tobish, do you know if there were changes, significant changes between the March and the July version?
Mr. Chair, yes. The document was significantly changed from the March draft to the current draft.
Okay. But this is what people have been making their comments on, right?
The July draft.
Okay, all
correct.
right. Okay, Mr. Tobish, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to clarify so I understand for certain what the Commission is looking for. And I think what I'm hearing is an issue response in a table format that typically has a column for the page, a column for the issue, and a column for the response, where it would go in the plan, et cetera. Is that correct?
Right. It doesn't necessarily have to be a column across a sheet. We've seen them where they've just gone an 8.5 by 11, where they identify issue and then the response. It doesn't have to be in a matrix, but whatever's most comfortable for you.
Because, Mr. Chair, I did hear from Ms. Pease that she was suggesting a consolidation of recommended staff changes, starting with items from September 26th through tonight. And I'm hearing that as well as Mr. Phelps talking more about a larger scale issue response. And I wanted to point out that the packet has our initial comment response table. Many of the items discussed in both public hearings are addressed in that issue response, as well as responses to your packets for the 26th and tonight. So I need to be sure of what you want.
Okay, Ms. Pease?
I think it is important to include any new issues that came up tonight, and there were a couple, at least, that were substantive and I would think would require a follow-up. For example, the issue raised by Mr. Meacham of whether there are pending selections and how that might affect the idea of a general land trade. The idea that there is a geographical feature around which Woronzof Park was built, and that cleaving the park might not, to some people, be, well, what would be the effect of cutting down the middle of the park? And then the question of, we heard some comments about on-site wetlands mitigation being a preferred community alternative to off-site. and there's some question as to whether the airport's, able to do that. So there were several substantive comments that would need to be added in. And as far as if they've been addressed and the Muni has already, the staff has already decided to add additional language or not add additional language, I wouldn't think they'd need to be raised separately, but there were some new comments. And I think the most important thing is whatever written document comes forth has the page number in the plan, the line item or the issue identified, and then the exact wording and where it's proposed to be inserted.
Mr. Phelps.
Yeah, I think that, again, Ms. Pease has described that properly. I think in large part what you're talking about here in terms of staff effort is to pull everything together. It's in bits and pieces right now. I think that, at least for me, it's going to be necessary to see everything arranged in some sort of logical fashion. But it also would be necessary to deal with some of the issues this evening, and it's also going to be necessary to wait for those comments from the Sand Lake Community Council that we have not received yet, and they will very probably bring up a series of substantive issues. I would also like the opportunity, like we did this last time, to be able to send issues to the staff that I have, rather than take time right now, that they would respond to an issue response summary. So I think in general, what we're talking about is consolidation of existing information, but formatting in such a way that's easy for us to go through it.
Mr. Cruz.
I've been to. I guess I didn't go to the first meeting on this. I've been to the last two, and 90% of the testimony dealt with the bike trail and the park. For a variety of reasons, people, very few testified in favor of it. Quite a few testified opposed it. I really didn't hear much difference as far as reasonings. Pretty consistent theme. So, in reality, I think there's a lot of other issues or a lot of other information on this West Anchorage plan, not just the bike trail and that park. And I just hope that we don't get bogged down in with that and at the expense of the other important issues in this plan.
Anybody else have any comments while we're in Committee of the Whole? Okay, I think what we're going to need to do is we're going to basically need to continue this until some date certain in the future when we will have the information from staff. And I'm just curious, any idea how long it would take you to put something together? In other words, consolidate all of the items you have in separate documents now, put them in sequence from, page 1 to page whatever, and answer some of the questions that have come up recently. Are we talking December? When are we talking about?
Good question, Mr. Chair. I would suggest that a minimum of 2 weeks.
Boy, you write fast.
Okay. 3.
Okay, Ms. Pease, you have some comments?
Yeah, I just wanted, Mr. Tobish is very thorough. I just wanted to say that when I tried to raise some of the substantive questions that came up tonight, I didn't list all of them. I mean, there was a question of soil stabilities for tunneling, there was a question of Clitheroe Center, and so on. So I'll leave it to you to identify all the new comments that might not have been addressed.
What's your choice, Mr. Tobish, for getting back to us with something?
Mr. Chair, what I could do the rest of this week is look through the data and give you a response at your next meeting.
Okay, why don't we plan on that? And that'll be a week from now, so you can sort of give us an estimate of when you think it would be done. In the meantime, I think what we need to do is go out of the Committee of the Whole And then probably need a motion to continue until we get an answer from Mr. Tobish, and that'll give us an idea of when we can actually date certain that we can start considering this. Just a second. Okay, I've been advised by the Secretary that all we really need to do is postpone the deliberation because we don't need to continue anything because we've already closed the public hearing. So we need a motion to come out of the Committee of the Whole, and looks like Mr. Frederick has moved it. Ms. Pease has seconded. Is that correct? Is there any objection? Okay, we're now out of the Committee of the Whole. We now need a motion to postpone. Moved by Mr. Frederick, seconded by Mr. Parks. Any discussion? Yeah, postpone till to date to be determined. Okay. Any discussion? Any objection? Okay, that passes. Oh, wait, Mr. Pruse?
I was just gonna say that this could be, in order for the proper time and get the proper information back from staff, it could go through the holidays and then some.
Yeah, and it's to be determined.
And you know, holiday schedules are what they are.
Right. Okay, is there any reports from any of our committees? Guess not. Commissioners' comments? I think Ms. Pease and I will have something to say next week. And I will take a motion for adjournment. It's moved by Mr. Pruse, seconded by Mr. Frederick. Any objection? We're dismissed.